Miss it. I was telling Bob, every time I land at Logan Airport, I cry. That's home. It's home. And now it's good to know the real origin of Cheers. I thought it was just a bar in Boston. So, I stand educated. Thank you, Mark, for that. Thank you for asking me today. I want to start with a story of two students that I have had the privilege of following actually for quite a long time in their history, probably since about junior high, but more formally since the college years. Katie launched into her freshman year at a large public university with a bang. Julia quietly and uneventfully entered into her well-known private college in the Boston area. Although Katie didn't like her roommate much, she found a lot of fun and friendship by going out with the other girls in her dorm. Julia, on the other hand, bonded really quickly with her Christian roommate and spent most of her time with her and developing that relationship. For Katie, the partying began Wednesday night and continued nonstop until Monday morning. Drinking 5 or 6 beers a night, that was her first estimate. She actually revisited that in senior year and told me it was more like 8 to 12. And smoking pot became a regular part of her daily regimen. Julia was shocked by the pervasiveness of alcohol on her campus and eventually decided, along with her roommate, that in order to hang out with friends and make friends, she actually needed to go to the parties. And so she did, but with a 1-drink maximum. She actually processed this with her roommate, and they made that decision together, and actually a decision they stuck with throughout their college career. Katie decided not to look into any Christian fellowship groups, decided pretty much to put church on hold. She thought the fellowship groups were cliquey, the one that she visited, and so decided, I'm just going to put this faith thing on hold and just wait. And maybe after college, reconsider, think about it again. But interestingly, her senior year, she really started to feel somewhat empty and actually went to an Easter service, and it made her feel hungry. It kind of reignited that. Didn't do anything about it, but it at least sparked the hunger. Julia immediately got involved in a campus fellowship group and a local church and found her faith challenged but growing. And so two girls who grew up in youth groups probably not that different from yours and mine, and yet two very different life stories and different faith trajectories. So as a result, at Fuller, we decided to initiate what's called the College Transition Project. We thought, we got to find out what's going on. And so the mission of that, let me put this up here. Here's these two girls. By the way, I've done everything possible to protect their anonymity. I've changed their names. I'll actually give you some geographical reference to where they're at. One of them actually may be attending today, but I have promised them absolute anonymity as we've gone through this process. But the goal for the College Transition Project was to understand the variables involved in the transition to college. We want to know what's going on. What are those things that impact that transition? And to identify components of youth ministry that make that transition more effective. And so, we're looking at both quantitative and qualitative. Trust me, this is the worst part of the whole presentation today. This is the intense part. The quantitative stuff, we basically did over time about 450 surveys. We surveyed about 450 students and followed those students through their college years. We started high school senior year and went through their senior year of college. And actually there's 3 different groups in there. So we've got a lot of survey data. To me, that's not very satisfying. I mean, I love statistics, I like numbers and all that stuff. But in order to understand the meaning of those statistics, we do the qualitative, and that was my portion of it. And so what I did was follow 15 students, and I followed them from their senior year of high school through their senior year of college. And I'm going to talk some more about that in detail, about what actually I did. But before we go any further, all right, you all are sitting here. You need to know each other a little bit better because you kind of got spaces between you. You're from all over the place. I would love if you would introduce yourself to the person next to you. Just get to know it. Yeah, I know. Some of you are going to have to move some territory there to make that happen. But introduce yourself and ask yourselves this. think about one of your students who has transitioned well to college and who's doing, continuing to grow in their faith. And think about what possibly influenced that, whether it's parent or whether it's youth group. At the end of the day, I'm going to ask you for those suggestions, and actually I want to put those on the board because research is great, but your life experience, your ministry experience is just as significant as this research. So if we could take like 3-4 minutes, talk to each other a little bit, talk about a successful student. A student has made that transition successfully, okay? And like I say, you might have to move some geography there to make this happen. All right. I think you guys have gotten to know each other a little bit. A little bit. All right. All right. You can whistle. Can you whistle? Can you whistle?
Can you whistle? Can you whistle?
You can whistle.
Let people know. You can whistle.
Okay, that was like opening Pandora's box, huh? Chatty, chatty. All right. Good. That's one thing to do, to invite youth workers to talk. You know, I mean, what an amazing thing. Youth workers are always gabby. It's great. It's great. Well, good. Hopefully that just initiated a conversation that you can continue at lunch. And like I say, at the end of the day, what I want to do is not just talk about the implications that, that I've got from this research, but I really want to hear things that you've found that have really helped these students make the transition. Because I do believe that all we've got from our ministry experience will really help us in better preparing our students. So, the research is not good. Basically, if we look at college transitions and students making that transition, what we've got statistically is about 40 to 50% of students drift from their faith as they move from high school into college. Most of them did not intend to do so. Only 20% of them intended to do so. That means 80% of them entered college thinking that they were going to continue to grow in their faith as they move through college. And yet that's not what's happened. And so this project was really to take a deeper look at what is it? What are those factors that are really impacting us? So what did I do? Let me give you, this is, now I want to point out the picture to the left. I think you've heard that I'm living in Southern California. So I was here, I think it was the coldest day ever last January. And yeah, totally unrecognizable. But basically what I did was I chose 15 high school seniors that I knew. Some simply by name, meaning, did not know them well. Others I knew their family history, I knew their parents, I knew the whole deal. And I knew them from a ministry setting. And so I decided to follow these students. I basically interviewed them their freshman, junior, and senior years. I went to their college campuses, traveled to each of their college campuses, and you can kind of see the route from as far as north as Vermont, as far south as Virginia. And basically, each part of this journey to me was very significant. Now you see my odometer here, that was 1,256 miles. I drove the whole thing, and then my little car there, and then dorm here. But basically what I would do is go to each campus. And significant differences between the campuses. One thing that I definitely learned was how the college culture varies so much from campus to campus. I mean, very different, and very different from north to south. I did it one route, I did north to south, another time I did south to north, and then the final senior year I actually split up. I did south one time and north another time. They basically chose where we met. So every time I would, call ahead, talk to the students, say, you choose wherever you'd like to meet. And one of the most interesting things was that the movement from public to private, meaning one of the students chose their college hockey rink to meet in. There wasn't a game going on or anything, and so we sat in the chairs next to each other, and he was very guarded, as you can imagine. A huge public setting. Most of them chose coffee shops, but by the end of it, senior year, they invited me to their apartments, had coffee with them at their apartments. You could see this transition as trust really grew and developed. A lot of in-between time for me. And as I say, I was going north to south or south to north, and these are long trips. Basically I would do this in about 6 days. But with texting, students would text each other, what I was asking. And of course, the first time, because I was asking about drinking and sex and all those, oh my gosh, the thumbs were working. So they knew, they said, oh yeah, they told me you're going to ask that one, so they were all prepared for me. But the other benefit of driving was for me to be able to reflect in between. Quite honestly, some of this stuff was really difficult to process. I knew these kids, I love these kids, and it was hard. And so just processing that emotionally, but it also helped me generate new questions. So I feel like as I moved down the trail, so to speak, I think the questions improved because I really had an inkling as to what they were experiencing in college and could better ask the questions. Challenges. The biggest challenge for me was probably that pastoral reflex. And honestly, to do research, you're supposed to be this nice, objective, distant person, and it just about killed me. It's like I just, all I wanted to do was turn off the recorder and just talk, help them process through the things they were telling me. That was very difficult. And honestly, that's one of my commitments now, is to simply walk alongside them now, because I just, that was very difficult. And then one of the things that I was able to do, though, was to bring others into the conversation, meaning people I knew that were in their lives, and just kind of heads up to them and say, have you talked to Sue, in the past couple of weeks or something? No, I really, that would be really helpful maybe if you gave her a call, and just to try to connect outside, but at any rate, really a labor of love. I just love doing this thing, and what I learned was amazing. And what I hope to do today, what today represents for me, is really the first time sharing specific findings from this 4 years of interviews, plus parents. That's the other segment of it, is they gave me permission to interview their parents, which is fascinating. And the different takes on their life from the student's perspective and the parent's perspective, night and day. But they allowed me to do that, which was amazing. So this is the first time I've ever shared the specifics from the whole 4 years in specific quotes. They've never been shared. So you'll get a taste of that. And of course, all 4 years is here. And I think one final note is that, I've said I'm from California, but these kids are my kids and your kids. Even though I live and teach in Southern California, this study focused on the lives and identities of 15 students from the Northeast, actually New Englanders. So these are the kids who, grew up in this environment. They're not mega church kids. They're not urban kids. They're your typical suburban kid from New England. So I say that because I know the kids that I work with in LA are different. They come out of a totally different context. Their values are different. It's just a different world. They're very Hollywood oriented and just so much image, and I mean physical presence kind of stuff. So much glam kind of thing going on. The guys use way too much hair product in my mind, but that's just Southern California. What do you do? But these are kids, what I'm saying? These are New England kids, and there's definitely a difference. So I say that to you to say these are our kids. These are the kids we work with here. One final note, research is great, but the God factor. I'm going to tell you some pretty hopeless stories, and yet I really have hope. I love the story of the prodigal son. I cling to that story, as I think many parents do, hoping that these kids will find their way back home. And it's very interesting. I've talked about doing a book on this to this point, and a person I've worked with, Chap Clark at Fuller, has recommended that I wait until they're 29 or 30 to get more of the end of the story. It's not over. This is not going to be over at 29 or 30, but I think we'll have a better sense of where they're actually going to end up. I do think many of these kids will end up back with God, and I can't wait. I'm so anxious to be there. I've asked their permission to follow them through age 30, and they're on. So it's I'm going to get old, though, I got to tell you. I got to do this car thing, man. This is just, ugh. Okay, so lots of surprises. Things that their honesty blew me away. I was shocked. And as I said, you're varying degrees of my previous experience or knowledge, relationship with these kids. I mean, some of these I knew very well and had great, solid relationships with long-term. Others barely knew. And yet these kids told me stuff I don't know that I would tell anybody. What it did was it reinforced they so desperately want to be known. They so desperately want to be known. And that was really encouraging to me, and a lesson that even though sometimes kids put up all those defenses and all those barriers, and sometimes they make it hard for you to get to know them, but bottom line, they really do want to be known. And so that was a big one. The other thing that was a huge surprise for me was their gratefulness. At the end of each time I interviewed them, I said, so have I asked questions that allowed you to really accurately portray yourself, and tell me, who you are and what you're going through and all that? And they said, yeah, but probably more importantly, this is the first time anybody's asked me to reflect on my college experience. And each time that happened, and all of them, even the guys, and some of them who don't use a lot of words, they were grateful for the opportunity to reflect. And I thought that was really significant. That says much to me, but we'll talk about that in implications. So, okay, I got to start with, let me go. Oh yeah, good old Erickson. Okay, back to school, here we are. The thing, when I started doing this research, and obviously, you've got to do some theoretical background stuff. And so I looked at the whole identity development, basically, because faith development obviously is embedded within identity. So this is Erickson's deal. You probably remember this from college, or maybe you've forgotten it, and that's just as well. But and you'll see Freud. You can kind of ignore the Freud stuff over to the left there. That's really irrelevant for this purpose. It's just the best chart I could find. But essentially, what this says is that during adolescence, students should be going through their identity development. They should be processing. They should be beginning to think about who they are, and figuring that out. Well, what we're realizing is that it's pretty darn delayed. It's not happening in the high school years for most students. There are some who are engaging it, but most students are not. Most students are not doing that until college. And so we've got, actually Keegan is, he's a researcher out of Harvard, has suggested that there's actually another step in here. And let me add his thing, because I think this is really important. This, to me, explains so much of what I saw in the colleges. Robert Keegan says, I believe Erickson misses a stage between industry and identity. His identity stage, with its orientation to the self alone, who am I, time, achievement, ideology, self-certainty, and so on, captures something of late adolescence or early adulthood, but it doesn't really address the period of connection, inclusion, and highly invested mutuality, which comes between the more independence-oriented periods of latency and late adolescent identity formation. And so what Keegan is saying is that these students have this, it's almost like a backward step. And this is what I was seeing in colleges, was as these students entered their freshman year, they went back to this stage where affiliation was so much more critical for them than actually engaging the identity task. And that was significant, because that meant that they were actually they're going backwards. They took a U-turn there for a period of time, particularly the first semester of freshman year. So they have this deep need to build a support group and develop friendships. Remember, these students just left senior year. If you think about senior year of high school, it's like the capstone. It's like you got all these great experiences, there's prom, there's just awards, all this stuff. I mean, you're as close to your friends as any time in your life. You've spent your lifetime building that group of friends. And then now you leave to go to a college where you don't know anybody. I mean, you are really alone. And so this is a huge crisis, I think, that happens for students as they move into college. And so one of the things, I think there really are, if you see on the handout, I've really got like 3 things that I think one filters into the next. And you'll see loneliness is the key. I think this is to me, this is the aspect of freshman college year that we don't notice. We really aren't aware of, and this actually leads to all these other events. So all 15 of these students, and again, guys and girls, noted the depth of loneliness they felt freshman year. And I mean to the point of depression. Many went to see counselors. One of them was talking to her best friend 5 times a day, her best friend from home. She was so lonely. They had various roommate situations which is going to come up in the implications, but those who had the most difficult time really didn't connect with their roommate or had conflict with their roommate. So that led to all sorts of stuff. Part of the deal with this, though, that loneliness, I think, is related to the identity development. In other words, if you don't know who you are and you really don't have that secure sense of self, when you go into the college environment, you're not exuding confidence. You just don't feel that good. So I think a lot of them just retracted into themselves. And so they had difficulty making friends, and it was just a real challenge. And these are kids who are pretty extroverted. And they weren't, there is one who is severe introvert, and he really struggled. Plus, he decided, because he was doing, college, that he needed to be independent, and made a rule for himself not to call home. That wasn't good. Yeah, that poor kid. He really struggled. But each one of them had this huge part of their freshman year that was just lonely. And I don't think we think about that much because we see them being so social. Here's one of the guys, his quote: "I actually had a pretty hard transition." This, by the way, is not the introvert I just referred to. "I struggled a lot the first couple of weeks and into the first semester. I really had a hard time sort of meeting people because I just felt overwhelmed. It's such a big place, and making friendships that were of substance, that people I could actually rely on, people I could actually talk to. So I find that was really hard, and I struggled a lot with it." And that was, again, one of the guys. Really tough. For some, interestingly, that sense of loneliness caused them to doubt God, caused them to wonder, where is God in this? Why do I feel lonely if God is truly present? And so that was very interesting. This is what Caitlin says, and I have changed all their names. "I felt lonelier since I've come to college. So sometimes I'm like, why am I feeling lonely? If I feel lonely because I'm not surrounded by my family, and sometimes here, and I'm not like friends with my roomie, and all my friends are on another floor, sometimes I just feel like alone. And that kind of leads me to doubting, kind of like, are you there, God? Like, why don't I feel you here? But at the same time, sometimes like feeling lonely, like compels me to like kind of run with him more and draw closer to him." So, it's a two-edged sword. It's interesting. And you will notice in these quotes, "like" is the most common word. And I thought, well, I could edit that out, but then you wouldn't get the real flavor. Like. Everything is like. So, what happens? We've got loneliness. I am convinced, absolutely convinced, that it's loneliness that drives the students to the party. They were very clear. It's not about getting drunk. That's not the purpose of going to the party. The purpose of the party is to make friends. The purpose of the party is to be with others. This culture, absolutely pervasive, just throughout. There was no college that was immune. I mean, every single school, and multiple schools told me, yeah, I hear, my school is a really big drinking school. It's like they all said that. It's like they're all very big drinking schools. All of them. Drinking and excessive drinking was just a part of the college culture. I will say this, that the week started earlier. The drinking week started earlier in the North than in the South. At least in the South, they could wait until Friday night. In the North, pretty much Wednesday night was when things began. And I think I noticed things when I hit the Bible Belt. Definitely some changes in culture there. But it really wasn't about going to a party to get drunk. It was going in order to find relationships. And I thought that was significant because I think as adults, oftentimes we think they're just going to get wasted. And it's like, no, they're really going to find others and to be with others. And so, things that students said to me, Andrew said, yeah, it could get pretty lonely here if you don't drink. That's it. Alicia, college, where it's like, I feel like everyone feels like that's what you have to do to be social, meaning drinking. I've never felt pressured to, but it's almost like you feel like, I don't know. You feel like you become it's like reflexive thinking. You start to want to because everyone else wants to type of thing, and you have to realize that, it's a decision you have to make. There's a chance you're going to end up in, with your roommate or going with your best friend or whatever, but you're basically going to go out and get drunk. And what do? I mean, you have to meet other people that you can be around, or you're going to be by yourself when you stay home or whatever, or you have to choose to go out with them and drink or whatever. And so those are the two choices: be alone or go drink. And I thought, wow, that's a big message, a big message. Pot's big. I don't know where they're growing it, but boy, it's big. It was amazing to me, and I'll talk more about a couple of these students are daily users. Pot just becomes part of the culture. And I actually was lectured a few times about the health benefits of pot, just so you know. And it, by the way, is much better for you than drinking. Who knew? Who knew? It's, but the funny thing is, when I left one of these campuses, just, got in my car and I'm driving about an hour away, and I've got my iPod, and I think, I'm going to listen to some music. I was in a place where there's nothing on the radio. Anyway, so I pull up my iPod and just subconsciously chose the Doobie Brothers, and it's like, and I did. I started listening to it. Jesus is just all right by me. Anyway, started listening to it, and it's like, there you go, in a nutshell. But that's, it was not a conscious choice. It was very funny when I woke up to what I had done. But the other thing I learned was about 420. I did not know about the relevance of April 20th. April 20th is Hitler's birthday and National Pot Day. And actually, it was the very first campus that educated me about that. And so from there on, I could ask other students about that. What happens on your campus? Well, unbeknownst to me, some schools actually cancel classes because evidently all the students are, high. So, yeah, that was shocking to me. But again, interesting, but very much a part of the college culture. Not at all thought of as a drug or as an illicit drug. It definitely would be something that many people would choose. Part of it is the community thing. I like to say that anyway. But part of it is that they share. It's like, I know when I was a high school student, and I did not come to Christ until I was 17, but when you had a reefer, you smoked it. You weren't sharing. And today's world, very much a community thing where people are sharing, and whether it's pipes or hookahs or whatever, but they share. And so it seems like a community exercise. So I don't know. That's the positive spin on it right there. Okay, so, and notice I did not choose a photo for this one, but see, New England's in my blood. The loneliness leads to the party, and the party, everyone, girls and guys, totally acknowledged the connection between drinking and the party thing to sexual activity. Everyone recognizes the increased vulnerability of women with drinking. Guys and girls both noted it. And when one of the guys said that to me, I said, so, is that something you take advantage of? And he says, well, sometimes. It's just very, just so well known. There's that sexual activity that is not in the context of a significant relationship. Usually, it's interesting among friends. Like they know each other as friends, and they become, in various levels of sexual activity, but whether they have intercourse or whether it's oral sex, but they're basically, the next day, there's no awkwardness. And I thought, wow, that's different. There's this disconnection between the activity, which we're going to see. We're going to see a lot of fragmentation in their lives between what they're doing and what they're thinking, and certainly not connecting the two or even connecting their behaviors. So very interesting. Hookups are common, obviously not, and they're not regarded as sex. All 15 would agree that hookups or anything short of intercourse is not sex. Yeah, it's difficult. One of the saddest things, and it was actually during junior year for me, one of the girls who was absolutely total party girl, but absolutely committed to no sex before marriage. And she had really stuck with that, stuck. And then the 2 nights before I was there to interview her, she had sex. And it was a result of drinking and basically a guy who had just worn her down, time after time after time, pressing on her, and she gave in. And she was so upset, that she had let go of that and knew that this guy was nothing to her, but that was a very sad moment. That was one where I called in the support types. So, some findings. What I want to do is take some time to walk through some of the really key findings. I mean, I've described college culture and just, kind of what I experienced there throughout all these different college campuses. But what I want to do is now talk about what about the faith development? How does this impact how students are developing in their faith lives? And so, let me start off with, we've got to change our thinking in terms of realizing that it's not just high school, that high school is not the primary time for identity development for most students. And what that means is, in other words, faith development. It's not happening during high school. It's mostly happening during college. And so when many of us think that their faith is pretty stable during high school, it is not. For the most. Now, again, there are those amazing students, and you know them. They are just on this trajectory. My niece is one of them. This is a girl who has 2-hour quiet times with her Bible. She's in a whole different world. She's a senior in high school. I hope she either comes to Gordon or APU, one or the other. But this girl is just together, but so unlike, 99% of the students. Most students do not have a stable faith. And so when we read essays by them, it's not that they're being hypocritical, when they do all the God talk kind of stuff. It's not that they're being hypocritical. That's the way they feel today. And, tomorrow it could change some. It could certainly, the wind could blow them in a different direction. So just recognizing that really they are not as stable, or their identity is not so fixed but when they're in high school. Definitely college, much better. Things that we've got, I think about one student who I asked him, tell me about your relationship with God. And he could not talk, now this is as a college freshman, could not talk his way out of that bag. Just couldn't put a sentence together to describe his faith. Much like what Christian Smith has discovered with the National Study on Youth and Religion. Very much. They cannot articulate their faith. So, so it really hasn't gotten into them. They really haven't realized it. So they've done very little identity work. This is a helpful way to think about it. James Marcia kind of took Erickson's, theory and broke it down into a way of thinking about, well, where are our students at as we look at the identity process. And so if these were two axes, you would see commitment and crisis. Crisis meaning investigation. That's the way Erickson would define or talk about exploration. He would call it a crisis. So there are those who are foreclosed. A foreclosed student is the student who simply says, if mom and dad say that's what I believe, that's what I believe. That's it. I'm just going to take whatever they say, and I'm not even going to think about it. I'm just going to inherit it, and that's that. Diffused is a student who is not doing any looking. They're not investigating. They're not exploring, and therefore they're not making any commitment. They're just totally disinterested. And I think there's a lot of students in high school who are in this diffused state, where basically they're just not interested. They're doing life. And even a lot of college freshmen, just doing life, but not even thinking or processing. On the other side, we've got moratorium, which is, for Erickson and Marcia, their way of talking about, hey, they're engaged in the process. They're starting to explore alternatives. They're starting to think through who they are. They're considering options for their belief systems, their life work, and mates, possible future spouses. So that's moratorium. It's really engaged in the process. And then the last one is achieved, where they actually work through all these options and alternatives and come up with, yeah, this is who I am, and really declare, make some commitment to a value system, belief system, and possibly vocation and possibly spouse. So I think this is helpful in terms of just kind of looking at where students might be. And what's interesting is in prior decades, students were engaged in the moratorium in high school. So this isn't today. In today's world, they're putting that off, or many of them are putting it off. And so as a result, we've got all this going on in the college setting. The problem with that is that in the college setting, they don't have the family support, the church support, and the youth worker support. All those relationships that they have built over all these years, I mean, they're there, but they're at arm's length. You know what I'm saying? They're not in the context. And I think this is something that is really, we got to figure out because adolescence is delayed, or the task of adolescence is delayed. This is definitely impacting our students' ability to work through their identities. I would even say, after working with all these students now through their senior years, they've all graduated, many of them don't know who they are. They still haven't figured it out. And I say it's largely because they've been in this atmosphere where it's all peers and they don't have the support that they need in order to process this. So it's a tough thing. Katie, let me read you her quote. I'm more like focused on myself. This is one who believed that she couldn't see how working through faith was actually part of working through who she was. She couldn't connect the dots. I'm more like focused on myself. So I'm just thinking about me and, reflecting on my life. So I think good and bad, but I haven't really thought much about God, especially this semester. I've just been really focused on myself, I think. One of the guys I interviewed totally said, no, I've decided not to pray because I'm figuring out who I am. I'm like, well, help me with that. And, yeah, I learned a poker face somewhere along the way, but yeah, tell me about that. And he said, well, if I pray, that means that I'm saying that I believe, and I don't know that I believe. And so I want to figure out if I believe, so I'm totally not praying. I'm not going to read the Bible. I'm not going to do anything, and I'm just figuring out who I am. So it's like this void. But the thing that's interesting is it's like they're living in these boxes. They fragmented their lives. And so here's the identity box, here's the faith box, and somehow they can't connect those two. They think they are very disconnected. And that's, the fragmentation was deeply concerning for me. Okay, second one. This absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. It was wonderful to chat with some Campus Crusade folks here earlier today because they're on this. They are on this. Involvement, engagement with a campus fellowship group and or church community within the first 2 weeks of the freshman year is absolutely necessary for continued spiritual growth. Absolutely necessary. All of these students' lifestyle patterns were set in the first 2 weeks of freshman year. And I thought, well, maybe for freshman year, but maybe they can change it up for sophomore year. I met with the freshman group when I did that in spring of their freshman year. So this is when they're reflecting back over the whole year. And all of those who were not involved in fellowship groups said, yeah, I think next year I'll go. I'll start, because that's a good thought. This is after reflecting, and I should do that. That would be a good thing to do. Not one of them. Not one. Their lifestyles persisted throughout. The first 2 weeks, and again, I say it's so motivated by that loneliness factor. The first 2 weeks are absolutely critical. Think about it. You get to college, the closest person you're going to be is your roommate. If you don't like your roommate, you probably find someone on your floor. Physical proximity's got tons to do with this. And so where does the floor go? Well, the floor's probably going out to party. So if we don't set them up and help them to get into these campus fellowship groups in those first 2 weeks, it's going to be a very difficult journey for them. There is, one exception was Julia, and you saw her, she was one of the two at the beginning there. Julia enrolled in a school that had a huge freshman class. And as a result, they didn't have enough housing. So they actually set up housing off campus a little ways away from the main campus. She found, and she was very committed to getting into a fellowship group and a church. She really, very focused. But logistically, it was just impossible because their buses, she basically had to use city buses, didn't feel safe doing that. It was just very difficult for her that first semester. So she actually didn't. But she's the one who had the Christian roommate. I think that, that really helped her. And actually, they processed a lot of life together. She went home at Christmas time and talked with her dad. They spent hours talking about how are you going to get into this group? I mean, you got to do something because you got to get involved. And they actually made some phone calls to a staffer of the campus fellowship group, and they got connected as soon as Julia came back after Christmas break, totally got connected with the fellowship group, walked into open arms, basically there. They were waiting for her, and started actually working on a freshman Bible study group. So, I mean, but it took her working with her dad to figure out how are we going to turn this around, because this is not going to be the direction, the direction she wanted to go in throughout her college career. So she's the one exception who did turn it around. Another conflict or another issue that students noted was the meeting times for some of these groups. Some of them meet on Friday nights. And so students would describe how they're at dinner with people from their dorm, and of course, wherever they then went, and they said to break off from that would have been really relational suicide, and they used that phrase. It's like they wouldn't have been able to continue those connections if they had broken off from the group, and so they chose not to do the fellowship group and just stayed with their group of friends. So a couple different things there to consider as we look at the fellowship group deal. One other thing, the clickiness of those who did visit a fellowship group found them cliquey. You know, it sounds like high school when we say that, but I think what was happening, and I asked them, I said, well, did you go back multiple times, or did you only go once? And they only went once. It's like a one-shot deal. If it didn't happen, it didn't happen. So what I think was happening, though, was a lot of these students were returning because they went to the first meeting. And so you know how it is, you reunite, you haven't seen them all summer. I think a lot of that was happening. And so here's the newbie and just wants to be welcomed, and they felt very much outside. And so they didn't return. Now again, these are students who then jumped, head first into the party scene. So excuse or reality, probably a little bit of both. But I think it's something for us to take note of in terms of we need on campus to be just open-armed and ready to welcome. I kind of think of models, with youth groups where, you've got greeters, you've got people waiting for people to walk in the door to greet them and to get them engaged with others there. So, but anyway, we'll talk more about implications. Okay, number 3 here. Many students consciously sideline their faith during college so that they can do the college thing. That little phrase, the college thing, I heard that more often than I care to. And defined by one student, which she pretty much summarized it, parties and drinking and boys. That's the college thing. And so, because adolescents haven't really worked through their faith, faith is kind of like an appendage. And so it's like not something they need. So it's easy to just drop it off at the door while they go park their car at college and do whatever, and then they think that they'll just go back and pick it up when they're ready. And so what was fascinating to me was it was a very conscious choice. It wasn't something that just happened. It was a conscious choice. Rather than feeling guilty about the things they wanted to do in the college thing, they simply drop off faith so that they don't have to consider or evaluate their actions by virtue of their faith. That was scary to me. That was scary to me. Interestingly, one of the students processed out loud and said how that reflects how little they value God. And what she said was, it's interesting. Oh, excuse me, this is me. It's interesting because some college students feel like when they go to college, they can check their faith at the door and then just kind of go through college and maybe pick it up on their way out. And Laura, freshman spring, says, I've really thought about that like it's college. And then it's like, well, if it's something that I want to check at the door, then pick up later, then why have it at all? If it's something I'm willing to give up for 4 years. So I'm trying, like I've definitely had that thought process, but I'm trying to definitely bring it into my life more because I mean, it's not worth having if it's something I feel like I can just check at the door. Interesting. Now she processed that, and she's one who did not turn around. Nothing, and she's someone who is very conscious of that decision, and yet did not turn it around. Yeah, most of them did think that God would be there at the door waiting for them as they exited. Although, you know, being in touch with several of them after the summer, I don't think any of them, nothing's changed. I mean, they really are on that same trajectory. And then a couple of them didn't want to think about faith because they were busy thinking about who they were. And so somehow it had no relevance. It didn't inform them. Again, interesting stuff. But the key here is that they absolutely sideline it. If you've read Tim Clydesdale wrote a book, sociologist, wrote a book called First Year Out. And it's about the freshman college experience. And essentially what he says is students are very busy just managing life, managing time, managing relationships in freshman year. They really are pretty disengaged from the whole identity task. They're just doing life. They're just busy, overwhelmed. One of the students actually talked about, and I think this is really true, you know, if you think about high school seniors, extremely busy year. I mean, academics, extracurricular, youth group involvement, you know, they're going a million different directions. Their lives are really plotted out, I mean, day by day. They get to college, and they have 12 hours a week, 15 hours, maybe 18 hours a week planned, meaning classes. That's it. All the other is free and available, and most of them don't have a clue of how to manage that time, what to do with their time. And yet they're very conscious of the fact that they need to be building relationships. So that's really what's on their front burner and not faith. So some interesting things there. The fourth one, many students are concerned about being identified as Christian, and so intentionally choose to not let others know about their faith. This hypocrisy of lifestyle thing, again, part of it's connected to wanting to do the college thing, so they don't want to identify themselves as believers because then they're afraid that people will call them out for their behavior, and they certainly don't want that. So they want the freedom to do what they want to do and not have anybody, you know, call them out for hypocrisy. So they choose not to. They want to party, they want to have sex, they want to do all the things that go with the party scene. If they identify themselves as Christians, at the very least, they will probably have other Christians look at them sideways and say, what are you doing? So they don't want that. Second reason they gave for not wanting to be identified as a Christian is the stereotypes that are currently associated with being a Christian. You know, everything from hypocrite to Republican to anti-gay to pro-war to homeschooled to anti-science to judgmental. I mean, this is the list they gave me. They did not want to associate themselves with that baggage. So if you think about topics in David Kinnaman's book called Unchristian, it's kind of like that laundry list in the table of contents. It's that list they don't want to be associated with or connected with. And so they pretty much don't want that label. The third reason was the institution of the church. And this was the least frequent of their responses of why they did not want to be connected, which I was surprised. Where I'm at in California, I hear this one all the time. But the institution, they're just deeply suspicious of the church as an institution, church politics, money, you know, the way money's handled, and of course, you know, recent, scandals, abuse scandal has certainly not helped. So this was such an interesting idea for me that they did not want to be identified as Christians, because I just thought, how do you not? If you are, how do you not? And yet it was very clear that some of them had simply maintained what they had done in high school. Many of them had made sure that they weren't known as a Christian in their local high school. They were just known as maybe a goody-goody, or one of them, who was definitely into the party scene in high school, just never let on, even though his father's church elder. You know, that's a difficult thing, and he was going to church. The disconnects, I think, are just pretty prevalent. Okay, you know what? This is probably a good time to take a short break. I know we need a stretch break and a little potty break there. So if like 10 minutes, good to go?